So what really happens when a massive empire just falls apart? Do things just descend into chaos? Or does something new, something maybe even more dynamic, rise up from the ashes? Today, we're going to dive into one of the most fascinating periods in Indian history, the time right after the mighty Maurya Empire. And we'll see, it wasn't an age of collapse, but an incredible age of reorganization. You know, this quote from Jagdish Chandra Bose just nails it. It perfectly captures the spirit of what we're talking about. It's not about an ending, it's about transformation. It points to this deep-rooted resilience, this incredible ability to constantly reinvent. And that is the key word for today, reorganization. Okay, so picture this. For about 150 years, the Maurya Empire was the power on the subcontinent. It unified huge territories under legendary rulers like Chandragupta and Ashoka the Great. But then, in 185 BCE, not long after Ashoka's death, it all just stops. The empire collapses. And that created this huge power vacuum, which leads to the biggest question of all. What happens next when a single unifying power just vanishes? So we enter what historians call the Age of Reorganization. Now, when you hear fall of an empire, you're probably thinking of a dark age, right? A period of decline and decay. But that's not what happened here. Not at all. This was an incredibly dynamic era where the single solid block of the Maurya Empire shattered into a beautiful, complicated mosaic of competing, creative, and really ambitious new kingdoms. And how did this great shattering begin? Well, it starts with a single dramatic act of betrayal. The last Maurya emperor wasn't taken down in some epic battle. No, he was assassinated by his own top general, his commander-in-chief, a guy named Pushyamitra Shunga. That one event was the crack that broke the entire imperial structure. And just like that, with the central authority gone, a mad scramble for power began. The political map of India was about to be completely redrawn, shifting from one unified state into a patchwork of brand new kingdoms. I mean, just look at this map. Where there was once single unified empire, we now have basically a blank canvas. This is the landscape where dozens of new kingdoms would rise up, each one fighting for territory, for influence, for legitimacy. The Game of Thrones, Ancient Indian edition, was officially on. So who were the main players in this game? Well, they pretty much fall into two camps. First, you've got the dynasties from right there within the subcontinent, local powers that were more than ready to claim their piece of the pie. And second, you have new groups coming in from the outside, drawn in by that power vacuum in the northwest. All right, let's meet the homegrown contenders first. And you can really think of them as these distinct characters in a grand drama. We've got the heirs, who took over the old imperial heartland, the traders, who built their power on immense wealth, and the southern kings, who had always been playing by their own rules. First up, the Shungas. Yeah, founded by the very same general who assassinated the last Maurya emperor. You could call them the Traditionalists. They seized the heart of the old empire and, to make themselves seem legit, they looked way back into the past. Their founder, Pushyamitra Shunga, and I know it's a mouthful, but he's important, even performed the ancient horse sacrifice. This was a massive public ritual designed to shout to the world, hey, a new supreme king is in town. Now, in complete contrast to the traditional Shungas, let's meet the Satavahanas from the Deccan Plateau. Their symbol of power wasn't some ancient ritual. It was a seafaring ship, proudly stamped right on their coins. And this one little image tells you their entire story. Their power wasn't just about armies. It was built on the incredible wealth from maritime trade. These guys were the master traders. And their commercial genius is literally etched into the landscape. See, these aren't just caves. This is the Naneghat Pass, which basically functioned as an ancient highway toll booth and rest stop for caravans. From here, the Satavahanas managed a huge network, trading spices and textiles all the way to the Roman Empire. We're talking about big international business. Meanwhile, way down south, the Cheras, Cholas, and Pandyas were kinda in their own world. Let's call them the cultural guardians. The Mauryas had never managed to conquer them, so they stayed fiercely independent, and they fostered this unique and absolutely brilliant literary tradition that gave us the Sangam Age, a true golden age of poetry. Okay, now let's pivot to the northwest, because this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. This is the story of invaders who came to conquer, but were, in so many ways, conquered by the very culture they found. And this brings up one of the most interesting questions of this whole era. How does an invading force not just rule over a new land, but actually get absorbed by it? What does that process even look like? Well, the answer lies in evidence, just like this. This is the Heliodorus Pillar. And here's the twist. It wasn't built by an Indian king. It was put up by Heliodorus, an ambassador of the Indo-Greeks, who were the successors to Alexander the Great's campaigns in the region. And get this, the inscription, left by a Greek ambassador, praises the Indian god Vasudeva as the god of gods. It then lists these core Indian philosophical ideas: self-restraint, charity, and consciousness. This is not a conqueror imposing his culture. This is a foreigner fully and publicly embracing a new one. Just an incredible moment of cultural fusion. So, as you can see, this shattered age of competition and cultural mixing wasn't a period of decay, not even close. In fact, it led to a creative explosion, a burst of new art, new architecture, and new ideas. I mean, all this competition and cultural mixing led to this incredible explosion of creativity. On the left, you've got the unbelievably detailed carvings of the Bharhut Stupa, sponsored by those traditionalist Shungas. And on the right, the absolutely breathtaking rock-cut architecture of the Karle caves, a project of the wealthy trader Satavahanas. Two totally different rulers in two different places, both leaving behind a legacy of magnificent art. And the creativity wasn't just limited to those two kingdoms. We see it popping up everywhere, from powerful individual sculptures like this Yaksha figure to entire complexes of rock-cut monasteries like Udayagiri, sponsored by the Chedi kings way out in the east. The skill of the artisans and the ambition of these new patrons is just, wow, it's stunning. Okay, let's take a breath. We've met the players, we've seen the evidence. Let's step back and figure out what this all means. When we look at this whole shattered mosaic, a few key patterns start to emerge that really define this entire era. So the first pattern really explains the name itself. Why on earth do we call this the Age of Reorganisation? Well, it's because, as we've seen, that single empire didn't just collapse, it shattered into a mosaic of competing kingdoms. This constant competition completely redrew the political map of India. So the key takeaway here is that this was an age of dynamic change and creation, not some dark age of decay. The second key pattern tells us a lot about the values that guided these new rulers. What was actually important to them? What principles did they live by? A really remarkable level of tolerance. Across all these different kingdoms, rulers actually took pride in supporting multiple faiths. King Kharavela called himself the repairer of every temple. The Satavahanas gave land grants to Vedic, Jaina, and Buddhist followers. It seems like a core part of being a good king in this era was to be a patron of all beliefs. And that brings us to our final and maybe the most fascinating pattern of all. How did those foreign invaders actually become part of Indian society? Just as we saw with those invaders from the northwest, they didn't just conquer, they participated. The Indo-Greeks were profoundly shaped by the culture they found, even putting Indian gods on their coins. And that Heliodorus Pillar is the ultimate proof, a Greek official publicly declaring his devotion to an Indian deity. It's the perfect symbol for this entire era, because what emerged after the empire wasn't chaos. It was a complex, competitive, and unbelievably creative world where cultures didn't just clash, they blended.